Welcome, everyone, and thank you. Thank you for joining us today for this really special webinar event. Before we get started, I would like to tell everyone to please put your questions in the Q&A section, and we will try to get it to as many of them as we can. So my name is Michael Steinberger. I am founder and CEO of Jewish Heritage Alliance, a nonprofit dedicated to research, preserve, and most importantly, to promote the legacy of Sfarad. For those of you who may not know, the word Sepharad in Hebrew literally means Spain, but historically speaking, it refers to the Jews of the Iberian Peninsula, nowadays Spain and Portugal. For those joining us for the first time, I want to be clear or make the point that our mission is Sepharad specific. Many organizations use the Sepharad name word more broadly, sometimes extending it to include Jewish communities from the Levant or other Arab lands. Our work deals specifically with the history and the culture and the legacy of the Jews who lived in and were expelled from the Iberian Peninsula. To broaden our scope and expand our reach, we developed a strategic alliance partnering with organizations, institutions, and individuals covering the private and public sectors that together create a voice of the collective, thereby amplifying our message. At this time, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the partners that helped make today's presentation possible. First, I would like to thank the Sue and Leonard Miller Center for Contemporary Judaic Studies, University of Miami, for helping sponsor today's event. I'd also like to thank and welcome two new co-hosting partners. We are excited to welcome Chabura, an educational organization dedicated to the theological dimension of Sfarad, making them a very, very interesting partner. We're also excited and proud to welcome the Jewish Virtual Library as a co-hosting partner. It's one of the most comprehensive online resources for Jewish history, culture, and current events. A hearty welcome to both. And of course, I would like to thank and acknowledge our share hosting partners that help promote our event today and usually always. I'd like to acknowledge the Greater Miami Jewish Federation, the Center for Advancement of Jewish Education, also in Miami, known as CAGE, Anna Museum of the Jewish People, the Society of Crypto-Judaic Studies as well, the Women International Zionist Organization, known as WITSA, also Florida, last but certainly not least, our friends, the European Jewish Community Center. Thank you one and all. And let's get started. At this time, it is my pleasure and honor to introduce today's moderator, a dear friend and colleague, Mr. Keith Stokes. A native of Newport, Rhode Island, Keith has dedicated his career to preserving and sharing history. He has served on numerous national and regional preservation boards, including as chairman of the Touro Synagogue Foundation in Rhode Island, as vice president of the Preservation Society of Newport County, and with degrees in both from Cornell and University of Chicago, Keith combines his expertise with a lifelong commitment to history, community, and heritage. At this time, take it away, Keith. Welcome, Keith.
Thank you, Michael, and welcome everyone. And I'm looking forward to introduce our first in a series of programs, this one, the Sephardic Legacy and Founders of Freedom. This three-part series explores how Sephardic Jewish experience from forced conversion and exile to commercial ingenuity and constitutional ideals would shape Jewish law, identity, and modern legal thought. This opening session, which is entitled New Christians and Reverts, Inquisitors and Rabbis, examines the legal and spiritual complexities surrounding the Iberian conversos, inquisitional authorities, and rabbinic responses across the Sephardic diaspora. We are very honored today to have our presenter, Rabbi Dr. Yohanatan Eliezer Demota. Dr. Demota was born in Miami. He comes from a very long line of Sephardic families from Spain, Portugal, North Africa, which would establish themselves in the Caribbean before migrating to the United States of America. He holds a Master of Arts in Anthropology and Religious Studies from Florida International University and a PhD in International Law from the University of Amsterdam. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Eliezer Demota.
Thank you, Michael and Keith, for your introductions. And thank you to everyone who is participating today and attending this lecture. This is a very important lecture for me because it details part of my family history. And it is my pleasure to be able to present this history and this anthropological study as we're going to explore today. We'd like for you to write down your questions and save them to the end. We will try to answer most of those questions, if not all of them. So today's topic, new Christians and reverts, inquisitors and rabbis. We're going to be exploring how two groups of clergy, of religious groups and authorities fought for the souls of Jews or new Christians. As we're going to see, on the one hand, we have inquisitors, and on the other hand, we have rabbinic authorities who have been exiled from Spain and Portugal and are now in North Africa and in the Ottoman Empire. There's an underlying tension between these two religions, Catholicism on the one hand, Judaism on the other hand. And this tension is created because of the nature of the legal underpinnings from both traditions. We have the Sinaitic covenant, and then we have baptism as a sacrament in the Catholic religion. Victor Turner, as an important anthropologist in the mid-20th century, spoke about liminality and comunitas. By liminality, he meant situated between and amid the roles of a sign is structured by law, custom, convention, and ritual. In other words, when an anthropologist studies a culture or given people, there are certain types of structures within the society, and then there's an anti-structure which is underlying. And this going in between the structure and anti-structure is what he calls liminality. Now, those peoples who belong to this state, this mental sociological state, are what he calls comunitas, which is the Latin word for community. So in this study, we're going to analyze the liminality and the comunitas state of the new Christians, or anusim, or crypto Jews. Let's begin our journey with understanding the Sinaitic covenant and circumcision. The covenant of circumcision, or as we call it in Hebrew, Berit Milah, begins with Abraham, the patriarch, who was commanded by the God to circumcise the male children born on the 8th day within his home, and also his slaves, those who were purchased. And in Mount Sinai, there is a specific ritual where the Hebrew people, all those who left the Egyptian empire, including the Israelites and various nations represented in the mixed multitude, they underwent a ritual. The Torah explains in the book of Exodus, chapter 24, that Moses made 12 altars, one for each tribe. And then he took 12 bulls and slaughtered them and sprinkled half of the blood on the Torah scroll and the half of the blood on the altar and the other on the people. This ritual may seem to be similar to like a voodoo ritual or West African ritual in the diasporic religions, but it is the bedrock of the initiation of the Hebrew people as Am Segulah, the treasured people or chosen people, as some translate. And so we have the word berit. Whenever berit is utilized in the Bible, there's always blood involved. It's a blood pact. It comes from the Akkadian word biritu, wherein two peoples will make a covenant or a treaty by cutting animals in half and then both parties walking through those halves, and then they will look at each other and say, whoever violates the terms of this contract will receive the penalty that these animals have received. So this is a very visual ritual which conveys judgment for those who violate this. So this is the word berit in Hebrew, which is borrowed from the Akkadian biritu. So circumcision involves blood, and also the covenant of Sinai involved the blood of bulls. And this is how the Hebrew people become Am Segula, chosen nation. Now, one of the big questions that emerges when we talk about the Jewish people is, what does it mean to be Jewish? Is it a religion? Is it a race? Or is it a nationality? If it were a nationality, all those Jews who would be born outside of the state of Israel or those borders of the Holy Land, they would not be Jews. If it were a race, a particular race, then people who want to join the Jewish people would not be accepted. So proselytes would be rejected outright. And if it were a religion, then those Jews who no longer practice or choose not to practice the Jewish traditions or rituals, they will no longer be Jewish. So what does it mean to be Jewish? Be Jewish, according to the rabbinic principles, is to partake of a heritage and to be part of Berit. Now that we know what Berit means, we can then understand everything that we're going to explain in this talk. Here we have various terms, technical rabbinic terms in Hebrew, which appear throughout the Talmuds and various tractates. We have the term meshumad, min, anus, tinok shenishba, leben hagoyim. And so I'm going to explain a little bit about each one of these, but we're going to mainly focus on this for the purposes of this talk on anus and tinok shenishba leben hagoyim. So meshumad refers to those Israelites who know the law, but they choose not to practice it, and they don't care. And so the translation usually for meshumat is an apostate. Then next to that, we have the min. The min is usually translated as a heretic. This is a person, this is an Israelite who ascribes the belief or multiple creators together with the creator God. So if someone says, oh, God is the creator, but he did creation, he created together with someone else or another being, then this is a type of minut, which is translated usually as heresy. Then we have another term, which is anus. Anus in the legal language, the jargon of the rabbis, will be translated loosely into English as coerced or in a status or in a state of force majeure. So when we talk about in law, we speak about the force majeure clause, which is, or sometimes the acts of God, which are natural acts that happen, which prohibit the person from being able to fulfill the terms of the contract. This person is in a state of onesut, or in a state of force majeure. So in Jewish law, when we speak about anus, we're not talking about non-Jews or people who are in a status or quasi-Jewish status. We're speaking about Jews or Israelites who are not able to fulfill the commandments according to the Berit or this treaty with God because of some status or some condition which prohibits them from practicing it completely. And then we have tinok shenishba leben hagoyim. This refers to children, Jewish or Israelite children, who have been sequestered specifically within the context of war or persecution against the Israelite people, and children are taken by non-Jewish authorities, and then they are raised within those cultures, foreign to the Torah or the Berit of the Israelites. So all of these words, then, these terms are utilized and mobilized by the rabbis in the rabbinic literature, which will help us to understand how rabbis and inquisitors on opposite ends are at war with each other, so to speak. So the term anus, forced or coerced, we can say Maimonides explains in the Mishneh Torah, which is his opus or magnum opus, in the laws of Sabbath. He says that those Iberian Jews who were forcibly converted to Catholicism are considered to be anusim. That's the plural term of anus, forced, since the social-political structure did not allow them to openly practice Jewish tradition. Moreover, a lack of knowledge about the legal implications of a specific precept can also classify an Israelite as anus. Also, the term tinok shenishba leben hagoyim, those children, the children of these wayward individuals and their grandchildren whose parents led them astray and were born into this heresy and raised according to it, are considered like a child taken captive and raised by them. Such a child may be unwilling to follow the path of the commandments, for this as if he were forced not to do so. Maimonides here is speaking within the context of the Karaite Jewish tradition. Those Jewish children who were raised within that context. And then he says the following about them. Even if later in life he hears that he is Jewish and sees Jews in their faith, he is still considered as one who is anus, coerced, or out of status, in the status of being forced, since he was raised according to that mistaken path. This applies to those we have mentioned who followed in the erroneous ways of their ancestors. Therefore, it is fitting to encourage them to repent and to draw them close to the strength of the Torah with words of peace. This is the Rambam, Maimonides, Moses Maimonides, Mishneh Torah, the laws of rebels, Ilchot Mamerim 3:3. So we have established now, according to Jewish law, who are anus or anusim, and who are tinok shenishba leben hagoyim, sequestered children, and what is their status. Now we go on to the Catholic tradition, and you can see here in these images, there are 7 sacraments. And sacraments in the Catholic tradition are not able to be canceled. You cannot cancel them. It's almost like berit in Hebrew. In Hebrew, the concept of berit cannot be canceled. It cannot be annulled. If you violate it, you receive the penalties and the fines, but the treaty still stands. And the similar concept in Catholicism, a sacrament, which are 7 in nature, they cannot be canceled. So a sacrament is a visible sign instituted by Jesus Christ through which invisible grace and sanctification are communicated to us. This is according to Otto Gisler, who is a historian of Catholic tradition. Baptism is the first of the 7 sacraments of the Roman Catholic Apostolic Church. Others include confirmation, the Holy Eucharist, penance, anointing of the sick with the oil, the holy orders, and matrimony. So we have 7 sacraments in Catholic tradition. Now, the Catechism of the Catholic Church states that baptism is the foundation of communion among all Christians, even with those who are not yet in full communion with the Catholic Church. What this means is that even if someone was baptized through this sacraments in the Catholic Church, and later as an adult chooses not to practice the Catholic faith, that person is still connected to the body and the communion of Christ with all Christians, even though that person is not in full communion. This is a very interesting concept, which is similar to the concept of berit in the Jewish tradition. In paragraph 1272 of these catechisms in the Libreria Editrice Vaticana, it states that incorporated into Christ through baptism, the baptized person is conformed to Christ. Baptism imprints on the Christian an indelible spiritual mark or character of belonging to Christ. No sin can erase this mark, although sin can prevent baptism from bearing the fruits of salvation. Given once for all, baptism cannot be repeated. So this is according to Catholic canonic law. So now we have a problem. We have a conflict. Now, when we study the phenomenon of forced conversions in Spain and Portugal, namely in 1391, there were various riots that broke out in northern Spain. In 1378, Ferran Martinez was one of the church leaders. He urged that 23 synagogues be razed and that Jews be confirmed or conformed to their own quarter to avoid contact with Christians. This is the time period when Jews were forced to also wear stars to distinguish them from non-Jews on Spanish territory. Riots broke out in Andalusia, in Castile, Aragon, Catalonia, and Extremadura. So this is almost all over Spain. Most Jews in Madrid, which today is the capital of Spain, they were either killed or baptized. In Burgos, which is a city in northern Spain, some were baptized. And this forced baptism is what caused the phenomenon of crypto-Jewish or converso communities. Throughout the 14th and 15th centuries, before the expulsion in 1492 of the Jews on Spanish soil, the conversos, meaning the new Christians, those Jews who converted to Catholicism, had contact with those Jews who were in southern Spain in Islamic territories, such as Granada and Cordoba. So as long as conversos had contact with those Jews, they were able to they were able to learn and educate themselves within the Jewish tenets, the tradition. And this became a problem. And this is why the Inquisition was reinstituted in the 1480s in order to weed out all heresy from the Catholic Church. And as a result of this, the Catholic Church, the authorities cannot deal with the amount of Judaizing new Christians within the church. Then as a result of the Reconquista, which was a period of the reconquest of Christian lands from Muslims in Spain, then the Alhambra decree was instituted and the expulsion of the Jews in 1492. History tells us that when a group of Jews that went next door into Portugal, they had to pay 8,000 ducats per head. If we calculate this in contemporary monetary units, we can calculate more or less 8,000 ducats is equivalent to what you can earn at that time in 3 months of work. So imagine a family of 5 or 6. That would amount to an entire year or an entire salary of a year to be able to mobilize your family from Spain into Portugal. History tells us that about 100,000 Jews left Spanish soil and went into Portugal next door. Now, 4 years later, on December 10th, 1496, the king of Portugal, who wanted to unite authority with the Catholic kings of Spain, he was forced to deal with the Jewish problem in Portugal. How did he do that? he thought to himself to expel the Jews, but then he changed his mind. The decree for the expulsion of Portuguese Jews was on the 10th of December, 1496. And then in Easter, 1 week before Easter of the next year, 1497, he thought to confiscate all the children from 13 years old and younger from all those Jewish families. And he forced the Jews, the parents of those children, to come to the plazas in the port cities. And those Jews found themselves, they didn't find their children, but they found a surprise. The surprise was that they were all washed, baptized forcibly by the Catholic Church officials. And they were not given a choice. They were not given a choice of baptism or death. They were forcibly baptized. This led to the crypto-Jewish phenomenon in Portugal. There's a difference between the Portuguese conversos and the Spanish conversos, in that the Spanish conversos in the 14th century were given a choice, but the Portuguese conversos were not given choice. They were just forcibly converted, and they were trying to find their children. And for 40 years, approximately, from 1497 to 1536, these Portuguese New Christians, in Portuguese called Cristãos Novos, they had been practicing the Catholic faith publicly and the Jewish traditions in secret in their homes. There are many different practices which the inquisitorial manuals tell us. For example, Catholic, very devout practitioners of the faith, they form the cross upon passing in front of a church or going inside of a church. And some of the things that these Jews would do upon arriving into a church, they would say a special formula, and instead of making the cross, they will touch their head saying, God is in my mind, God is in my mouth, and God is in my heart, but they will never cross. They would also say, I'm going into this place, but I do not worship the gods of stone nor of wood. And all this will be said in secret. And this phenomenon happened for about a period of 40 years until 1536, when the Portuguese Inquisition was instituted. And then there were tribunals set up in various places, in Lisbon, Coimbra, Évora, and then for a short time period in Porto, Tomar, and Lamego. It is very interesting when we look at inquisitorial records in the New World. We will see that the term Portuguese or Portuguese is almost equivalent to a Jew, because there were so many Portuguese in the Spanish territories who were caught by the Inquisition, and they were taken to either one of the three tribunals in the New World, namely New Spain, which is in Mexico, Cartagena de las Indias, which today is Colombia, or Nueva Granada, New Granada, which today is Peru. And so there were three tribunals in the New World. And in those inquisitorial records, whenever you see the term Portuguese, this is always a case with a new Christian who is Judaizing. One of the things that these Jewish families did as new Christians, when they would baptize their children, they would go to the church, have them baptized, and upon arriving back home, they would shower or bathe the children to remove las aguas de destrucción. As we say in Spanish, the waters of destruction. Those referring to the baptismal waters. They would bathe them in order to purify them from the baptismal covenant. This map is one of the traditional maps that historians utilize in order to show where Jews went at the time of the expulsion of Spain, 1492. We can see here North Africa and also the Ottoman Empire and also Western Europe in the Protestant Christian lands, such as in Germany and the Netherlands and Belgium. But what few historians talk about is this map. This map shows us the Western Sephardic movement, that diaspora. And according to historians, we have Jews who have reverted to the Jewish tradition in Amsterdam mainly, and they are traveling as merchants to the New World or in the Western Hemisphere and establishing Jewish communities, whether it's in Senegambia on the west coast of Africa, whether it's in the Atlantic islands such as Mallorca, Azores, Madeira, or whether it's in the West Indies, which is today what we know as the Western Caribbean. We have Jamaica, Hispaniola, which is Haiti, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, Curacao, Bonaire, all of those territories. And also in Northern or in South America, we had a huge community established in the 1600s in Recife, Fortaleza area of Brazil, and also in Suriname and Guyana. It's a lot of history to talk about at this moment, but for the purpose of this lecture, we should know that they established communities in almost every single port around the world, and also in the East Indies, going to the Indonesia and Singapore and Malaysia and India. And wherever Portuguese Jews went, also the Inquisition followed, whether it was the Spanish Inquisition or whether it was the Portuguese Inquisition. In the case of the Portuguese Inquisition in the New World, there were no tribunals in Brazil. That meant that anyone that was caught for Judaizing in Brazilian or Portuguese territories, they were taken back to Lisbon to be tried back in Europe. Now let's explore the rabbinic responsa. How do the rabbis respond to this phenomenon? Do these Jews who have converted to Catholicism forcibly, do they belong to the Jewish people or not? I want to focus on these four chachamim, these four rabbis: Yitzhak ben Sheshet Barfet, Shimon ben Semach Duran, Shlomo ben Shimeon Duran, who was his son, and Abraham Aben Zibna. These four rabbis, they were from Spain. They lived in the 14th to 15th centuries, and they escaped. Their families were able to escape to other places in North Africa and also in the Ottoman Empire. And they wrote extensively about this phenomenon. And I want to explore now the legal aspects of how they determined who was considered to be anus or coerced and yet part of the people of Israel. So let's talk about now the hazakah of the anusim. When we talk about hazakah is a legal term which comes from the word hazak in Hebrew, means strength, fortification. In terms of law, the term hazakah could be translated best as legal presumption. What that means is when we study science, we're looking for a rule of law by doing various experiments, and after we see the same result, we have a hypothesis, and then we see the same result 3 times. This is called then a rule of law. The same thing happens in Jewish law, and this term is called hazakah. When something repeats 3 times or more in a particular social context, we can then say this is the hazakah. This is the legal presumption. So the rabbis presume that if it happens 3 times, then because of that frequency, we can presume that it will happen the 4th, the 5th, 6th, and 7th, and so on times. So how did they establish the hazakah of the anusim, the coerced? We're going to analyze 4 passages from the Talmud here to understand this. In the Babylonian Talmud, Tractate Chulin 12a, the rabbis say, we learn that whenever facts can be verified or ascertained, we must do so. And when they cannot be ascertained, we must follow the majority. So this is the rule of the majority. And now they give an example in the Talmud. Thus, the shochet, who is the ritual slaughter, is considered valid and fit to slaughter for the Israelite people, since the majority of people using the same modus operandi are recognized as professionals in ritual slaughter and knowledgeable of its laws. What this means is that if we see someone slaughtering in the same exact manner that the Jews slaughter, we can presume that that person is an expert in the laws of slaughtering. We don't need to disqualify that person a priori. The law says, however, if a sage comes and checks the knife of that ritual slaughter and sees that the knife is pasul or invalid, then that can disqualify the shochet. But a priori, because of the modus operandi of that ritual slaughter, we presume, we give hazakah to anyone that's performing this ritual, that they know what they're doing, that they have been tested. And so based on this principle, the sages, the aforementioned sages, they rule that those communities claiming to be Jews from Spain who demonstrate that they follow the same modus operandi as the majority of Jews can be presumed to be of the Jewish people. Then we have another term. This term here is a portion extracted from a heterogeneous majority. So the example that's given here is, for example, if we have a batch of dough and you extract a piece of that batch of dough, that small piece is a representation of the majority of that large piece from where it was extracted. This is in Aramaic, it's called farish meruba farish. And we find this principle in Tractate Chulin 95a, where we learn to follow the majority because anything separated from the heterogeneous group, that means it's mixed, it's not homogeneous, it's mixed, heterogeneous group, is considered as having been separated from the majority. So the case that the rabbis analyze in their teshubot, in their responsum, is involving a city with 10 butcher shops. 9 of those butcher shops belong to the Jewish people, to the Israelites, and 1 of them are non-Israelites. And now the case or the question is, what if a non-Jew is selling meat to Israelites within that city? Can those Jews purchase that meat? And the rabbis rule, yes, because the majority of the meat that's being sold in that city are from Jews. We do not assume that the meat that's being sold by the non-Jew comes from the non-Jewish butcher house. So this is a presumption or hazakah that is based on the majority and a small portion which is extracted from the majority. So how does this apply then, or how did the Chachamim apply this in their response to the situation of the anusim? They said that anyone that leaves the Iberian Peninsula, where is the majority, the sociological majority, and presents himself before the Bet Din, the rabbinical court, in North Africa or the Ottoman Empire, or in the lands where Sephardic Jews were dealing with these cases, they were established as Jewish or as Jews based on the notion that the majority of those who left Iberia during the Inquisition were indeed Jews, as they came from the majority of the anusim group whose mothers were Jewish. So that's how they applied these principles to this sociological phenomenon. The third case or third legal concept comes from the Babylonian Talmud, the tractate Baba Messiah, which speaks about civil laws. And the rabbis teach us here that there is no benefit, where there's no benefit for someone involved, it is presumed that they do not transgress by lying. So this is based on psychology. Where there's no benefit to be gained, people are not presumed to be lying. People do lie when they want to gain some type of benefit. So based on this principle, they applied it to those anusim who left behind all of their possessions, their comforts and lifestyles in the Iberian Peninsula to practice Judaism in another land where they didn't know the language, they didn't have jobs or business. Many times they left their families behind to escape. So the rabbis presume that he or she is not lying about being Jewish given all the losses at stake. That's the loss of benefit. And then the fourth legal principle has to do with an oath. In Jewish law, most of the times when people present themselves in order to deal with civil cases, they have to make an oath. And this oath brings into the courtroom the divine presence, because the divine name is pronounced or something that represents the divine name, such as a Torah scroll, is utilized within this ritual before the case begins. And by saying this oath, the judges can then feel comfortable receiving the testimony of the witnesses that they are not lying, that they're telling the truth. So how do the rabbis deal with the cases of anusim in this particular context? In the Talmud, a tractate that deals all with oaths, shebuot, states that in case involving collection of payments for the temple, where the person is not required to take an oath because it is presumed, here we have the word hazakah again, it is presumed that no one would conspire to defraud the temple, because the temple represents the epitome of holiness, kedusha. So no one would lie about this because they know what would be the consequence of violating such a holy place, going back to the concept of berit. So as a result of this, the rabbis rule that this person does not have to make an oath in order to give his or her testimony. So this principle also applies to a dying person, since there's no personal benefit to be gained in their name. Someone who is mesukenet, on the verge of death, this person has no personal gain because they are gonna die. So this person does not need to say an oath. So the rabbis apply this to the anusim in the same exact way, in that someone who is being persecuted, being chased for being a Jew, would not lie about their Jewish identity upon presenting themselves before Bet Din or Jewish tribunal in another land, because they just lost everything. They are being persecuted for being Jewish. And the opposite would be the tendency is people want to hide their Jewishness at a time of persecution. And when someone does the exact opposite and says, I am a Jew, I just left Spain, I left Portugal, and I'm here, I've come now to Greece or to Turkey or to the Netherlands or wherever it was, this person was believed for speaking the truth. Now, there's an interesting hazakah, legal presumption, about the anusim from Portugal, which was established by Chacham Yom Tov Sahalon. He was one of the students of the famous Rabbi Yosef Karo, who wrote or compiled the Bet Yosef and what we know today as the Shulchan Aruch. This is 1694. He states that there is no suspicion that a person returning to Judaism has a non-Jewish mother, since the anusim carry the legal presumption, hazakah in Hebrew, that they marry among themselves, especially the Portuguese. So here is an interesting legal presumption based on the sociology of Iberian conversos, who are still living in the lands of idolatry, as the rabbis call it, las tierras de idolatría. And so in 1694, Chacham Yom Tov Sahalon writes that the majority of the conversos who are still living in Iberia, they are marrying amongst themselves. We can see this as well in the inquisitorial records and the tribunals. As far as the late 18th century, we can see that in the inquisitorial archives, there are certain families that are still being labeled as new Christians. Why is that? They're being labeled as new Christians because the old Christians consider themselves pure. And there's a law that was instituted in Spain called pureza de sangre, the purity of blood. So they did not want to mix their blood with tainted Jewish blood or Moorish blood. So a way to enable this was to identify those lineages of new Christians. So the forced conversions that are happening in the 14th century, those that are happening in the 15th century in Portugal, their descendants for the next 200 years are still being labeled as Cristãos Novos, new Christians, or Cristianos Nuevos in Spanish. And so based on this sociological phenomenon, the rabbis then study and make a ruling that they are marrying among themselves, and especially the Portuguese. Why especially the Portuguese? Because the Portuguese were not given a choice to convert, whereas the Spanish were given a choice throughout from the 14th to 15th centuries to convert. So there's a slight difference there. And we're going to see that now here. There are 4 types of conversos according to Chacham Yosef Aoud. He said, 1, those who wish to be faithful Christians and have minimal contact with other Jews. That's one type. Another type are those who wish to live as Jews. A third type, those who wish to maintain both Jewish and Christian identities simultaneously. And then we have a 4th group, those who want neither to be Christians nor to be Jews. So we have these 4 types of conversos. Now, from what we have explained here, how the rabbis dealt with this, we are dealing with those conversos who want to live as Jews, and perhaps those who maintain both identities but escape. They're trying to find a way to escape. Now, this is what I like to call a battle for the souls. We have rabbis writing extensively on this issue for a period of 350 years on the one hand. And on the other hand, we have the Inquisitors dealing with this situation and not knowing how to handle it. There's a particular case of a man surnamed Rodriguez, who was Portuguese, by the way, in the Inquisition records of Nueva Granada, which today is Peru. And in that inquisitorial record, it mentions that he was slaughtering the animals according to the law of Moses. And as a result of that particular case, the Inquisitors, they write a letter back to Spain saying, we don't know what to do with all these Judaizing heretics here in the New World. You have to understand that Spain had issued an enactment that new Christians could not travel to the New World. Only old Christians could, those who had at least 3 generations of old Christian blood in the genealogies. So how did so many new Christians make it to the New World? That's a question to discuss in another talk. So we have Inquisitors versus rabbis. There's this ideological, theological war going on. And in between, we have the conversos, the anusim. Chacham Saul Levi Mortera, who was from Italy, of the German Ashkenazi community, and he became the chief rabbi of the Spanish-Portuguese community in the Netherlands and the teacher of advanced Talmudic studies in the seminary. He wrote an agreement, or let's say a Pesach, a legal ruling that only those anusim who left the Iberian Peninsula, we're speaking about the males specifically, who underwent the circumcision or the berit milah, the covenant, the blood covenant of circumcision, will be accepted into the community and then participate as full members. So what does this mean, and why did he make this ruling? He made this ruling because there were many men, Jewish merchants, who were Christians, new Christians, who were going in and out of the Iberian Peninsula and into the Netherlands and Germany and France, wherever there were Jewish communities established. But they did not undergo the rite of circumcision. Why didn't they do that? The reason being is because they were going back into the Iberian lands, the lands of idolatry, as the rabbis called them. And if they were caught by the Inquisition, one of the first things the Inquisitors would do was to drop their pants, and they would see if they had circumcision or not. And so these new Christians who wanted to maintain this Jewish and also non-Jewish identity, they did not undergo the rite of circumcision. So now Chacham Saul Levi Mortera, he makes a ruling for his community to strengthen the identity of those newcomers in the Netherlands, that they must undergo the Berit Milah as a sign of disconnecting from the Catholic sacrament of baptism. Now I want to talk about the psychology of the anusim. How did these people feel? They were Jewish and Christian. They had multiple identities that they had to deal with at the same time. And I want to bring here Victor Turner and also Joshua Love Lieberman. In the book Peace of Mind, Joshua Love Lieberman says, "For if every man is created in the image of God, and God is one, then it follows that if a man allows himself to become a divided soul and a personality internally at war, he in fact denies his divine image." This is very profound. God is one, and if we separate God into pieces, then this destroys the oneness of God. If humans are created in the image of God, but this human being is warring with identities, then this is a denial of the divine image, or imago Dei, as the term is utilized and mobilized in the literature at the time. So based on Liebman's premise, it could be argued that the experience of the conversos in the early modern period not only affected their position within Iberian society, but also their psychologies and spiritual destinies. That means the future, their descendants. So let's speak now about some conclusions from this. Victor Turner says that by possessing both Jewish and Christian identities simultaneously, the conversos formed their own comunitas, that is, a subculture within the structured Catholic society. They were neither here nor there, but in between. At the core of this anti-structure were the theological concepts of berit and sacraments. Berit in the Jewish context and sacrament in the Catholic Christian context. Although both metaphysical ideas had distinct origins and were separated by space and time, they converged during the period of the Inquisition, contributing to the liminality, that means being in the limbo, and comunitas of the conversos. Both the sacrament of baptism and the Sinaitic berit were considered irrevocable by the Christian clergy and the rabbinic authorities, respectively. Ultimately, the Iberian anusim represent the transitional phenomenon described by Turner, liminitas comunitas. I would like to thank you for this lecture. And now we're going to open it up for a session of questions and answers.
So before we do that, first I want to acknowledge and thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for this insightful thought-provoking exploration of the historical and spiritual challenges of the Sephardic diaspora, a true deep dive shedding light onto the enduring questions of identity, faith, communal memory. So I thank you for your work and especially for your commitment and dedication to preserving the Sephardic legacy. At this point, I would like to take a moment and make this appeal. So Jewish Heritage Alliance is a nonprofit that is committed to the preservation and promotion of the Sephardic legacy. One of the many ways we do this is by delivering these amazing free webinars. So while these webinars are free to attend, they certainly are not free to produce. So this time, I would like to ask you, our dedicated audience, to please consider getting involved and support our efforts. Please consider making a tax-deductible donation that will help support our work today and always. Also, just before we go into the Q&A, just a mention about our educational journeys. These are very unique, specially designed tour programs intended to bring the stories of Sfarad to life. Our final 2025 Portugal tour is departing November 4th. Those of you who may want to are interested or want information, please contact us for more details. And at this time, I would like to turn the program back to Keith and Jonathan, who will address your questions. If we cannot get to all of them today, we will email you the answers as soon as we can. At this point, I turn it back over to Keith and Jonathan. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Michael. And again, if you have any questions, please add them to the chat. We do have one initial question that's coming in through the Q&A. And Jonathan, the question is, what are the 3 locations of the Inquisition in the New World?
Yes. So Nueva España, which is Mexico today, or Mexico City. We have also Nueva Granada, which is in Peru, Lima, Peru. And the third one, Cartagena de las Indias, is today, which is Cartagena, Colombia. Those are the 3 places in the New World where there were Inquisition tribunals.
Thank you. And the second question is, crypto Jews were courageous in their determination and perseverance. They are Jewish 100% in their endurance over generations. Don't you agree to this?
Yes, I will agree to this for sure. I will agree to it because we see it historically what's happening, and then we see the reemergence of the descendants of some of those crypto Jews in the 20th century and today in the New World.
The next is several questions. Can you share your thoughts on reversionism, or that some congregations require full conversion for us who are feeling dismissed because of lack of proof or other traditions?
Oh, that's a very controversial topic. And that's going to answer this question is going to be, we would have to analyze the different Jewish tribunals or courts around the world and why they're ruling as such. I wrote a responsum on this some years ago, and the tribunal that I work with, we made a decision based on the contemporary sociology and anthropology of specific places, and also the previous rulings from the Sephardic rabbis from the 14th century until the contemporary time period. There are some tribunals who do not, who rule on other authorities, so they arrive to a different conclusion. So if you're asking me for my opinion on what do I think about those descendants of anusim who have to, at this time period, go through a full conversion, I would say that this is going to depend, or this is the prerogative of that particular Jewish tribunal to do so. Our Jewish tribunal doesn't do that. We look at specific genealogies, family customs, and the particular sociology of a region to establish a hazakah based on majority and the rulings that we discovered or explored in this talk today.
Thank you. And can you also speak more about the escapees who were found by the Inquisition?
The escapings?
The escapees, yes.
The escapees. Oh, that's a whole nother talk. But some of the I will speak about some of the strategies that some of these anusim utilize to escape. Some of the strategies was they made up genealogies. In some cases, they will make up a lineage of old Christian families going to a local cemetery where a family were buried together, and they would just assume that genealogy for themselves. That was one strategy. Another strategy was paying the jailer or paying the customs officer some money, and that way that person was able to escape. And other ways of escaping was through piracy. Some of these people were on ships traveling from one place to another, and then there were pirates from an opposing authority, like the Netherlands against Spain or Portugal. Then those peoples who were considered to be conversos on those ships, they would be rescued by the Jewish families who were in open or public communities elsewhere. So these are some of the strategies that were utilized for the escapees.
Thank you. And are conversos accepted in Israel?
So we talk about contemporary conversos. This once again goes back to the political underpinnings of the tribunals that exist today. There have been cases of people who have been able to trace their genealogy along matrilineal descent, going back to the time of the forced conversions. And many of you know who Jenny Milgram is. She has written books called originally My 15 Grandmothers, and then now 19 Grandmothers. She has traced even further back than that. And I will use her as a case study. After 2 years of investigations of all the documents that she had to translate from Spanish into Hebrew, the Jerusalem High Court ruled that lineage is a Jewish lineage. They do not need conversion. So anyone who descends from that lineage, all they need to do is to accept the Berit and start to practice as Jews. That's the ruling that was given in that particular case. And other tribunals do the same thing around the world.
And another question, what do you know about the exodus of conversos to the Balkans and the Ottoman Empire?
Oh, that's a very good question. So we know, for example, I was in Izmir in Turkey last year. And when I went there, I was surprised with the amount of Portuguese Jewish communities. Those communities were established mainly by Portuguese conversos. So we're talking about that region of the Balkans. And then as we go into Serbia, Croatia, or the former Yugoslavia, there were also conversos who left from Spain and established those Jewish communities in Sarajevo and other places throughout Yugoslavia or the former Yugoslavia.
Can you estimate how many descendants of these conversos exist possibly today?
I don't like this question because I don't like to get into this political situation. But there are some conservative historians, and there are others who are, I would say, love to exaggerate. I would say if we speak about descendants, not halakhic or Jewish established descendants, just descendants, the numbers have to be in the millions all over the world. Now, from those millions, how many of those can actually prove that they are descendants of conversos? And then those who can prove that descendants from conversos who are of matrilineal descent, that's a whole nother question. That has not been quantified yet.
Yohanatan, let me ask this question. What are some of the crypto-Jewish converso customs that still exist today? So to give an example, I live in Rhode Island in the United States, in Rhode Island, we are still to this day the most Catholic state
Yes.
in the United States. I have come across a number of Portuguese, particularly Portuguese and Cape Verdean Catholics, who have told me stories of their grandparents and aunts taking on very interesting blended Christian, Catholic, and really Jewish traditions, such as uh, lighting candles and praying to the rosary on Friday evenings on a consistent basis, opening windows during thunderstorms and saying a prayer and recognizing the power of God. And these are devout, active Catholics. Are these some, and are there other examples of converso traditions that still exist to this day?
Thank you for that question. I will speak about, in my experience as an anthropologist, going around Latin America and going around communities in Spain and Portugal today. I would say that I have found a pattern among the descendants of conversos. And that pattern has to do with how they separate their pots and pans. So, and people won't know why they do this. I've been interviewed many people, and they won't know what is the origin of this practice, but these families have this practice, which is to have a separate pot or pan or type of a dish for cooking only meat, and a special like type of small pot made of aluminum to heat up milk. And you can't mix those two. So this is something that goes directly into Jewish law, rabbinic law. That's one very powerful and clear custom. Another two of them are based on superstition. And they come directly from the time of the Inquisition and the colonial period. So one of them is the notion of not counting stars. So there's a superstition among descendants of conversos all over I've seen. The children are taught not to count the stars. And if they count the stars, the superstition is that warts will grow on their fingers, their hands. And so this goes back to the time period of the Inquisition, where people, old Christians or even new Christians who wanted to prove how Christian and pure they were, would see Judaizing conversos go and count stars at night after the Shabbat was over or a particular holiday, and they would be tried by the Inquisition just because they are counting stars. So these families created this superstition to avoid the scrutiny of the Inquisition. That's one of them. Another interesting one, which is actually codified in Jewish law in the Shulchan Aruch, which is a 16th century Jewish text from Iberia and the Ottoman Empire by Rabbi Yosef Karo, in Yoreh De'ah, which speaks about ritual laws. At the end, Yoreh De'ah, he speaks about the laws and the customs of burial. There's a custom that codified in Shulchan Aruch, based also on a superstition of Jews living in the Iberian Peninsula at the time, that when someone passes away, they should spill all the waters that are in containers that are not covered, they should be spilled outside of the house. They should be poured outside the house. The reason being is the superstition is that the angel of death drops blood into all of the water. And if someone happens to drink the water, they would also die. So that's based on a superstition in Iberian by Jews, which is codified in the Shulchan Aruch in Jewish law or a text of Jewish law. And if you go throughout the converso diaspora, mainly in what we know or history they call a New World, the Western Hemisphere, you're going to find various families doing this. When someone passes away, they spill all the water out. They don't know why they do it, but they do it. So these are some of the customs that I want to talk about today.
And how should crypto hidden Jews wishing to re-embrace and be recognized as a part of the Jewish communities particularly in places like Italy, where rabbinical authorities are placing very difficult barriers. Have you come across this? What would be some of your recommendations in response?
Yes, last year I was in Napoli, in Italy, so that's southern Italy, and the authorities in that synagogue, the Sephardic synagogue, which was the community of the Abarbanel family, who left Spain and went to Italy in the 15th century, in that synagogue, they accept the anusim from that region. So, and I asked the leaders of the community, how can you do this against the rabbinic authority of Rome? They said, Rome is Rome, and here is Napoli. So, what I would say to someone like that is, find the rabbinic authority or the community that will accept you. If you go to somewhere where they don't accept you, you're wasting your time and you're going to suffer potential abuse. That's what I can say to that.
And just to follow up with that, did conversos make refuge in Italian ghettos?
Yes. So Ferrara, Livorno were some of the ghettos, and also Firenze in northern Italy. These were ghettos where Jews were forced to live in, but these ghettos were very different from the Ashkenazi ghettos in the Pale of Settlement, where these ghettos actually produced an environment of artistic development and intellectual stimulation. So the Jews in those ghettos utilized this sociological context to produce something even better than when they were living in free territories.
I love this question. In Portugal, crypto-Judaism origins are often found in cooking, sausages without pork, some types of cake, and etc. And I'll just expound upon that because in the history of Newport, early Jewish families, particularly conversos, the Lopez from Portugal and others from Seville, Spain, would actually follow tradition of using chicken, very kosher. So that's a fascinating question, but could you give examples about that?
Yes. So even I would say even in the language, Portugal is an interesting place, especially in northern Portugal. I had the opportunity to do some anthropological work in Portugal from the year 2017, the years that I lived in Europe, and I went extensively to many places throughout Portugal, and I found many patterns with the cooking, and also in the language. In Portuguese, continental Portuguese, to say a little bit, you say bocadinho. But in Brazil, they say pouco. So, and this is very interesting. What is bocadinho? Bocadinho is a mouthful. And this terminology comes directly from Jewish law, which for liquids, there's a minimum amount of liquid, which is in Hebrew called revi'it. The mouthful, the amount that you can hold of the liquid in your mouth determines whether you have to say a blessing or not, or whether it is considered enough for you to intake after you say the blessing. This is bocadinho. So we have this word in continental Portuguese, which tells us of the Jewish past. Some of the things in terms of cooking also have to do with the types of oils that are utilized in cooking. Instead of using animal fat for cooking or frying things, then vegetable cooking oil is utilized as well among some Portuguese families in the north. So we can study specific places such as Valparaíso, Chaves, Carção, Arguzelo, Tomar. All these towns, you will find families who descend from conversos. Some people know about it and others don't know. But if you go to their kitchens and you analyze what they're doing and why they're doing it, you ask them, why do you do this? They won't know how to explain the origin. There are customs passed down by the mothers.
Now, this question asks, when you speak about matrilineal descent over generations, can you expound upon that? And are you saying that only if you can verify that in every generation over 500 years, that the mother was a direct descendant, that we today would consider ourselves a descendant to be Jewish?
Oh, very good question. So in Jewish law, the Jewish heritage, the identity is passed by a mother, the mother to the children. So one of the ways that some Jewish tribunals determine this is documentation going back to various generations, going back to either the time of the Inquisition or going back to the time of the forced conversions. And so most of the people who have genealogies as such, the genealogy won't say that this person is Jewish because they were Catholic Christians officially. So how can a tribunal determine whether these people were Jewish or not is by using parallel records in the Inquisition to see how, let's say, a brother or a father or an uncle or an aunt or a cousin of that lineage who were tried by the Inquisition because of Judaizing practices. So this requires genealogical work together with tracing the parallel connections of that genealogy to the inquisitorial records. That's how that's done.
This is a question regarding conversos who tried to maintain dual identities, and then clarifying those that may have tried to avoid circumcision. And also, are there any contemporary examples of this kind of dual identity among people today?
That's really hard to say, and the reason why is because in the 1990s, there was a surge of what we call Messianic Jewish movements throughout Latin America. That had to do with mainly because of two people. There was a man named Chaim Levi and another called Dan Ben Abraham, who goes by the name Daniel Chaim today. And these two figures went throughout Latin America, practically telling people that they were descendants of Jews because of their surnames. So a lot of Christians who saw their surnames on this list, they started to adopt certain Jewish rituals through literature, through videos. When we talk about later in the 2000s, the YouTube explosion, 2006, 2007, and through social media, many of these people who have been born Christians, they adopted Jewish practices, and then they have this quasi-Jewish Christian theology, practice, ritual, lifestyle. Within that group of people, so I'm speaking particularly within Mexico, Puerto Rico, Colombia, Argentina. I've been to all these places where I've seen the same thing happening. There are some people who stay in this messianic theological identity where they keep their faith in Jesus or Yeshua, as they call it, but also accept the law of Moses as valid. And they stay there in that space. There are others who leave that space and connect to the local Jewish communities, or some of them even made aliyah. They made it to Israel, and then they either converted in Israel or they proved Jewishness. So I've seen many different cases. It's a difficult question to answer because we cannot prove continuity unto today as this phenomenon as a continuous phenomenon of dual identity. In most cases that I've seen in my anthropological studies is that most of the descendants of the conversos of the colonial time period and Inquisition time period, they assume the Christian identity. They keep many Jewish customs, but they lose the consciousness of Jewish identity. That's what I've seen in my expertise.
And just a follow-up question with that, someone had asked, a lady from Portugal told her that surnames can identify people of Jewish descent because their ancestors chose plant names, such as Pinheiro.
Okay, so this is something that some people have published in books or is going around online, and there is let's say, in the case of Portugal, there are many surnames that are even found within the descendants of Portuguese Jews who went through the conversion, but the forced conversion in Portugal, but they were able to escape to Italy or to the lands of the Ottoman Empire. And for example, the surname Pinto, we have various famous rabbis. We have the chief rabbi Morocco. His surname is Pinto, Yoshiao Pinto, and this surname is Portuguese, and is specifically talking about a color, Pinto. And but the original surname of that family was not Pinto. That was the adopted surname because of the forced conversion. And we have surnames like Oliveira, which comes from the olive tree, which can hint at the Levite ancestry of that family. We have, Coelho, which means rabbit. Also, Pereira from the pear tree as well. There are various. We have the famous Rodriguez Pereira rabbinic dynasty that comes from that history as well. So I would say that it is not indicative solely by surname, but that there is a pattern among Portuguese Jews that there are surnames belonging to plants and trees and animals, things of nature.
And our final question is, if you trace Judaism through mothers, but are Catholic for 3 centuries, would you still need to convert?
So once again, this is going to depend on the tribunal. So those Jewish courts that are following the Jewish law and the rulings as they were established by the Sephardic Chachamim, as they were interpreted. I gave in this lecture 4 or 5 different, or 6 different rabbis rather, but there is an entire list. There are more than 50 responsa dealing with this from the 14th century until the 20th century. We can see a continuity. And so basically, I would say this: if we look at Jewish law, the way it functions, the concept of berit cannot be broken. So even if a Jew says, oh, I don't want to be Jewish anymore, I'm going to be a Buddhist or a Hindu or a Christian or Muslim, that particular person will be considered perhaps meshumat, an apostate. But if that's a woman and her children and her grandchildren, they had no choice in changing their ritual practice. So those children are considered to be anusim, or tinok shenishba leben hagoyim. So they're like sequestered children who were brought up in foreign customs. So if we look at it from a Jewish legal perspective, even if someone was raised in the Catholic tradition for more than 3 generations, but they are able to prove that they are from the Jewish people because of all of these evidences, such as the customs, genealogy, and the inquisitorial tribunals connecting their families to that, in my opinion, my humble opinion, that is enough to say that this person comes from the Jewish people, regardless of the faith.
I just want to thank you, Dr. Eliezer Demoto. This has been fascinating. It now gives me an opportunity to bring it back to Michael. Michael?
Thank you.
So, wow. Once again, I must thank you, Dr. Jonathan, for an amazing presentation. And of course, Keith, for excellent management of the program. I also want to thank you, the audience, for your continued interest in the saga of Sfarad. I'm going to touch about a point that was asked earlier, just to touch, to embellish on a question and an answer. So the question was asked, how many descendants of conversos we have in the world today? And so Dr. Demoto was very careful, and correctly so. It's a loosey-goosey science to most people, but there is research. And so the research suggests, and I hope everybody is sitting down for this number, research suggests that there are over 200 million descendants. Brazil, which has the largest number of descendants, Brazil is made up of about 213 million people. And research suggests that at least a quarter, if not a third, of Brazilians are descendants. So that's 70 million people just in Brazil. If you want to learn more about that, Jewish Heritage Alliance has embarked on a very ambitious initiative called the Converso Online Community Initiative. It's on our website. You can learn more about it there. And so I will take a second stab at asking for your support and donations. The work we do here at Jewish Heritage Alliance is a little bit beyond my ability to describe to you right now, but it's very in depth. Taking another stab at the appeal, I think those of you who are interested in the work we do and the work that we're going to be doing may want to consider supporting us. Also, I would tell everyone that our next segment, and we invite you to join us for the next segment of the series, that'll take place on October 19th, where we explore how these descendants of Sepharad built thriving commercial and legal cultures, blending halakha, tradition, and innovation, and how these shaped communities and trade and what became a very vibrant Jewish life. So for any additional information about our work, about our tours, about our initiatives, I invite you to go to our website. Those of you who are not registered should. I think most of you are. And once again, at this point, I thank all of you for joining us on this and previous webinars. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.